Okay. Okay. Hi, I'm John from Broadsheet, and you're very welcome to another show looking at the mother and baby home issue in Ireland. We're joined by Frank Brehany, who is a lawyer and who is the offspring of mother and baby home survivor victim Eunan Duffy, who himself is a child of the mother and baby home up in Newry. And we're unfortunately Breda Murphy can't be with us, but we're very honoured to be joined by is it Marie or Maria? You prefer Marie, don't you?
Marie.
You prefer Marie. It's Marie Arbuckle, and Marie has such an incredible story. We spoke yesterday, and I don't think I slept right after it. You have experiences from both from being a child and growing up in both different sides of the same institution, effectively. Can we go back? Can we go back? I hope the guys don't mind, Maria. If you talk through your own upbringing as such before we get to Paul.
Yes. So I was taken into care at 2.5, they're telling me, by the records. But my sisters are saying it isn't, that I was a baby when I went in, that I was the youngest.
In Derry?
In Derry, yes. I was taken into the other's house. And by the time I was 5, I was in a foster family, which only recently I've ended up getting my files after 30 years of fighting for them. And 30 years ago, I was told that they would up in flames in a fire in the courthouse in Derry, which I got researchers and everything on it. There was never a fire in the courthouse. So I kept going back, fighting for them again. And like a phoenix, they rose out of the ashes and became a file. About 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago now. The day the legislation was passed in Northern Ireland for the preservation of records.
That day, was it like recorded delivery to your home?
No. I got the phone call at 10 to 6 that night. I'd been on the radio twice that morning talking about the records and foster care. And then I got a text saying that I was mentioned twice in the assembly during the legislation going through. And 10 to 6 that night, I get a phone call from the social worker saying they'd found my files. So I then went on the Friday to see the files. They find out that foster care, even back in them days, there was no vetting done because there was no way, they hadn't got computers or anything back then. And from the day the woman walks in and asks about it, to the day we're placed in her house is 18 days.
And she already had 9 children.
She was 9 children and a single parent.
Single parent.
She was a widow.
And she was working as well, but
she was working in the school as a cleaner, but says that she would leave her job if she got a child. So she went in there and say she went in asking about adoption and that fostering was advised. So she goes in there on the 19th of the 4th, 67. By the 21st, she's back in the office. She's been into another's house, saw me and my wee brother, and decided she would buy one, get one free, basically. She'd take 2 instead of 1 now, that she was getting foster adoption. So, yes, within 18 days, the 2 of us was placed in her house.
Amazing.
Even though they they'd been out to her house and they says that she wasn't a capable housewife.
Yeah, so it was unsuitable.
And that us Arbuckle children would fit in nicely as it wasn't a place of high standard.
Amazing. And and then more of your siblings joined you.
Later on then, yes, as her children was getting married and out of the house, I had another brother who came at one stage, but then he left again. And then I had a sister who came and stayed. And then also there was another child that was taken from Fawn Nursery and brought to them as well.
Okay. And you believe she was doing it for the money towards the end anyway? I mean, when after her 9 children, she could retire or she could live on whatever payments. Is that right?
It was definitely for the money. There was no love there. We basically done all the cleaning, all the work in the house. Even for her kids, we were like skivvies for her kids. We had to iron their clothes, wash their clothes, when we got old enough, we made the dinners, everything. And her kids swanned about like they were princes and princesses.
Right. And then, I don't want to rush you on it, but just to move on then, you come out of that situation.
So when I was 15, well, I found out I was fostered when I was about 12 and a half, 13, around that age. And then I started rebelling because they were mentally, physically, and sexually abusing me. So when I found out they weren't my family, then I started rebelling. And they classed me as uncontrollable. Sent me to, well, no, she took me, the mother took me to see the psychologist. And I've got the report here, but she was given the psychologist one story. And when I read the social services report, when I was getting taken then to Middletown, they contradict each other totally. So in the end up, I got taken away and I was put in the Middletown, which then Middletown wrote a report that I should never have been taken there because I'd never committed a crime. And they ended up taking me back to Derry again, to another children's home. I went in the social services office and I reported everything that happened in the foster family. And they tried fostering me out again. I says no, I wasn't going to no other foster family again. And every time they'd put me in the one, I'd run away. So they ended up taking me back to Middletown again, where I stayed until I was 17 and a half. And I was working then in the bookie's office in Monaghan. And I asked, could I move into the flat with these 2 girls I'd met? And Middletown let me move in. And I met a guy, got pregnant. Me and him had an argument when I was about 8 weeks pregnant. And the staff out of Middletown came and collected me from his dad's place, took me back to Middletown. And then everything just went fast from there. I was put out to work as a living nanny in Ballabay. And then in the January 81, they came and collected me and took me to Dublin, to St. Patrick's in Dublin. I then went on to have the baby in March 81. And to me, I always had it in my head that the social workers came and collected the baby and took him away. But now I've got my TUSLA reports back, TUSLA file back, and it's saying that they came and took me away from the baby after a week because I was being very difficult.
Leaving the baby in St. Patrick's and taking you where, back to Derry?
Back to Middletown.
Back to Middletown in Monaghan.
In Armagh.
Armagh, I beg your pardon, sorry.
Yeah. And this is what I could never understand. I'm in Armagh. Why are you sending me to Dublin?
In the first place, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, the mother and baby home's only out the road in Uri. But they sent me the whole way to Dublin.
And you gave birth in St. Patrick's?
Yes.
And the last time you saw Paul then was, were you lad?
According to St. Patrick's, I was taken in there on the 16th of January. I gave birth in the March. They're saying that Middletown came and collected me and took me back to Middletown. And then they bring me back again to St. Patrick's.
Okay.
For what reason, I don't know. I've already had the baby. I'm not pregnant.
And the baby's not there anyway. You go back and the baby's not there anyway. It's, the baby's left, right?
Yeah.
And go on, sorry.
So that's when seemingly I'd run away. I had it in my head for years that I'd run away from the place, but I couldn't understand it. And then when the news broke about the mother and baby homes, a journalist had done a story on me, and somebody contacted the journalist and asked me to join the St. Patrick's Navan Road Facebook group. So I joined it, and two of the girls came on and started talking to me that they'd remembered me from it being in there. I don't remember my time being in there at all.
Yeah.
Except for typing. I remember typing. And I remember this nun kept saying to me that I wasn't allowed to hug the baby or anything. I was allowed to feed him, change him, wash him, and that was it. Right. That he wasn't mine, so I wasn't allowed to do anything other than that with him.
And when was the last time you saw Paul then? Do you remember that?
It was the day I signed the papers in Armagh. They brought him to see me in Armagh.
They brought him to Armagh, okay.
Yeah. And then I overdosed and the same day and ended up in the mental institution in Monaghan.
Right. And that was that. Did you get to see Paul that day?
The day I signed the papers.
Right. And then,
just for a couple of minutes, I got to see him in the office.
And Marie, then 30 years then pass, basically.
40 years.
40 years, sorry.
It was the week before his 40th birthday. So fast forward to September 2020. So Paul was born in 81. So now we're in 2020. And I get a call from Judith Gillespie, who was headed the inquiry in the north.
Yeah.
And told her my story. And she says, I'm going to get somebody to help you, Marie. And then in November, I got a phone call from social services in Derry saying that they'd been assigned to be my social worker and that they were putting a trace on the adoption papers. I get a phone call in December to say that they found his adoption papers. Now they were putting a trace on him. And then, of course, we went into lockdown again. So then somewhere between January and February, I get a phone call off them saying that the trace couldn't go ahead because the GRO was shut. And the first week in March, I get a call to say they had traced him and they were now sending him a letter.
And he lived in Derry, right?
Pardon?
He was living in Derry.
Yeah, he was actually living in Derry at the time. But they didn't send the letter to Well, they wouldn't have known he was living in Derry. They sent it to his adopted parents' house.
Right.
And the letter stated that this may or may not be somebody that's related to you. So when he got the letter, he thought it was a sibling or somebody looking for him. And he rung them. He got the letter on the Saturday and he rung them on the Monday morning. And he says, have you any idea what this is about? And he says, I presume that one of my siblings or somebody is looking for me from my mother's family. And they says, no, it's your mother. And he questioned it, why was that put in the letter then? If I'm on his birth certificate, why would they say may or may not be related to you when they know rightly I'm his mother? So they give him my name, but all they would give me was his first name. They wouldn't give me his last name. So his partner Googled me, and I'd actually just been to Dublin that weekend, and there'd been a video of me talking outside the commissioner's office. And he says that he didn't want to wait and leave me waiting any longer, that I'd been searching for that long. So he contacted me through his partner's Facebook page, and we arranged, there was messages going between us, and it was one of the things he wrote down, how ironic is it that I'm an adopted dairyman? And I'm like, what do you mean you're adopted dairyman? He said, I've been living in Derry for 7 years now. So literally, social services in Derry knew that I was in Derry, because it says to them, if anything's going to happen, I would extend my holiday in Derry. And they told me no, to go on home. But my son had other plans, so we ended up meeting up that weekend. And turned out that he had already met my sister, who works.
He didn't know.
Without knowing that that was her nephew. And she works in the school that his daughter goes to.
Amazing, isn't it? And
then it turned out that every summer he stayed 2 minutes walk from where me and my children lived with his auntie every summer.
Amazing. And he does look like your sons, doesn't he? Well, I mean, there's a mark.
They all look alike. They all look like me.
But you're living in England, but he came over then for like half a year to get to know you.
He came over in the August to get to know his brothers and sisters, and he ended up staying from the August until December. So yeah, nearly half a year.
Amazing that you only sort of resolved this after so long. Both your fostering and your and Paul. It's incredible that it took so long. I mean, 40 years, 50, you know.
Well, throughout them years when I was asking them, they would tell me that I wasn't allowed to look for him, that he had to come looking for me. And they told him that, because he says to them, why has she left it this long? And they says, the social worker says to him, she was never allowed to look for you. You had to look for her. So I don't know why they broke it then in 2020.
Yeah. Eunan, can I let you come in here? It's an amazing story, isn't it?
Yeah, amazing story, and an amazing woman as well. For what she's been through, and the fact that Marie's very, very active in campaigning, and still obviously trying to get to the bottom of things about her own life story and account, and you know, facing a lot of the problems that many of us are, and trying to plug the gaps in information from her early life. And I mean, it's her case is a case in point, you know what I mean, where people have been stonewalled, automatically rejected on first and second approaches, and then, you know, there's a different turn of events, and suddenly records that had been destroyed or lost or missing suddenly appear.
Oh yeah, and in the box in the top shelf.
Yeah.
And put away in a different file, in a different folder, in a different cabinet, and, you know, all sorts of things. Yeah.
Can I just say about Paul? He went to a very good home in terms of his adoptive parents were very nice, weren't they?
His adoptive parents were lovely people.
Did they pay for Paul effectively? Was there a handover of money for him?
I don't know. He says that he has all the paperwork at his mum and dad's. And he says that he would get it for me, but so far he hasn't, and I don't want to push the issue with him.
No. Are they still alive, his parents?
Yeah, they're still alive. They're in their 80s now.
Yeah, it's very delicate, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, he had an adopted sister who was adopted when she was a bit older. So she was older than him as well. So They had her first, and she remembered her family. So when she went looking for her family, it didn't turn out good.
Okay.
Didn't have a great reunion with them. And there was lots of lies that told. And she ended up she's dead now, just put it that way.
Yeah.
And he didn't want them. Right. He says that's why he never went looking, because he didn't want them going through the same grief as they'd been through.
Yeah.
Sister.
I think, Frank, you mentioned it before, most of these don't end up well, do they? Those reunion thing, you know, when they've been breeded, that kind of the fairy tale stuff doesn't happen often.
No, I mean, it is difficult. I mean, even in my own search, you know, you have to take every step really slowly. I mean, you know, with due respect to social workers, they often caution about treading, using their phrases, where angels fear to tread. But, you know, people like Marie and Eunan and myself and Breda, you have to take those steps. You have to take that journey. And I mean, I've had a few doors slammed in my face, but you know what? In general, I've been lucky in terms of making contact with you know, sort of long lost family members. But it is difficult, and you know, Marie's story is remarkable, absolutely remarkable in so many ways. It was interesting there. She used a phrase that she and her brother were placed into that particular first place because they thought they would fit in well, because the standard wasn't very high there. Yeah. And as she was talking, it reminded me of the mindset of a lot of these institutional players, and you know, there's one very famous sort of contributor to this, going back to the early 1900s, the Reverend Vaughan, who ran one of the rescue societies down in London, and you know, he had a remarkable turn of phrase about not just the parents of these children, but people like Marie, people like my dad, you know, and their worth in society. And, you know, it was very much a stock phrase that the these offspring and the parents were to be removed from the face of the earth. I'm literally quoting him from the book that he wrote. And, you know, if you have that kind of prevailing attitude, as it were, you know, stemming, you know, from the 1800s to the early 1900s, you can see how, you know, the so-called societies, the so-called religious, the so-called state apparatus would, you know, consciously or unconsciously subscribe to, you know, that worthlessness theory.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of stands out in Mary's story. And, you know, the other thing that stood out for me in the story is the absolutely undoubted state sponsorship of slavery. It can't be described in any other terms.
Yeah, the typing issue, Marie, is bizarre, isn't it? All you remember is typing, you know, constantly typing, and that's all, right? That's all you remember.
Every day going into this room and just typing.
Mm.
It's so.
It's the actual.
According to Tusla, it was that I was on a program to teach me how to be a secretary.
Yeah.
But to me, what stands out in Marie's story there is the fact, and I've heard it repeated about in my dad's case. You know, he was boarded out or fostered, if you want to call it that. And I've heard plenty of stories about the boys who were fostered out in the town that he was in, and the actual conditions that they lived in, and the work that they were required to do. And Marie told the story there very clearly, you know, with this family, you know, at their beck and call to do absolutely anything, apart from the terrible abuse that she clearly suffered in, you know, while she was in their, in inverted commas, you know, care. You know, it is unfortunately one of the many symptoms of this kind of mentality, you know, about the worthlessness of people's lives.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how many, you know, apologies are made, you know, whether it's in the assembly in the north or whether it's in the Oireachtas, you know, it fails to actually capture the very elements of the experience that Marie and indeed others, you know, can tell us.
Well, Marie got the same thing that a lot of the survivors get. You know, you're after the money. You found in your fostership or in your files from, not from Tusla, but regarding
from social services.
Social services,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, Pat Armstrong, the social worker who eventually found these files, even though he was involved in 2010 for looking for them and couldn't find them back then.
Right.
Well,
messy offer.
He says to me, exactly everything you says, Marie, to me is reiterated in them files, that my words was, we were like a conveyor belt. My family was like a conveyor belt to that family, so that when one of theirs got married, another one of us would come and join their family. And even like my brother was in a different home even from us because he was older, and like they went to that home as well to bring him out.
Oh, he came out, right. But they said that she's going to be trouble on your file or something.
They says all growing up through all the school, it's always stubborn. As that's what got me to this place I am today.
And that it's going to cost them money or something, that you're going to pursue it, and perhaps best to, you know.
So yeah, in 1993, when I went looking for this paperwork, he turned around and he wrote a letter to, what's that letter? So Mr. Stanley Baxter, who's senior social worker, wrote a letter to Mr. Paul McGrady, social worker. Marie McDermott contacted me again today regarding access to her foster care records. She had previously called with me some months ago regarding the issue with, I suspect, a view to compensation claim for her alleged abuse while in foster care. I advised Maria McDermott that the day-to-day personal care record is something which is not held by the fostering unit. This is usually held by the appropriate child care team. I anticipate from the tone of this conversation that she will continue to pursue the issue of the whereabouts of her file and her access to it.
Well, he was right.
That was the only thing he did get right.
And he said there was immediately the compensation. You were looking for the compensation, and that wasn't.
No, I never went looking for compensation. So in 1992, two social workers came to my house. I was sailing along quite merrily in my own wee life, in my own wee bubble, and they came to my house with paperwork. Their exact words was, Marie, this is compensation due to you for our neglect of duty towards you. They said, you need to take it to a solicitor. So I went in the solicitor. The solicitor says, we need to get your files. And this is when this whole thing started about getting my files in 1993.
So it was them who came, who stirred the nest. Really
they came to me, but when I was at the meeting where I actually got my foster care records 4 weeks ago, so there was the social worker and there was the deputy director of social services on the meeting. And when I says to him, look, I never came after yous. Yous came after me. Yous opened this whole can of worms up. I didn't open it up at all. And they started talking among themselves. And seemingly there was a case back in 1992. Now, Pat Armstrong called it a criminal something, and I couldn't catch the second bit because I was so upset with these files. And I couldn't catch the second bit. And he was talking to Tom Cassidy, and he says, remember, Tom, where it was that if you were abused while you were in care, the case thing. And he went, yeah. He says, that's what she's talking about. I said, you know what, Tom? I never got a penny off you. But now I'm coming back and I want me 30 years interest plus the stress and hassle you put me through since.
Yeah, they regret not dealing with it back then. I mean,
yeah. Oh, they will regret it now.
When they came and they said you owed this money, did you get any money? You didn't get anything then?
Didn't get a penny from them.
You never heard back from them on that, no?
Oh, they fought me. So for about 10 years, I was fighting them. So in the first case, he says I was over 21. I just knew I was over 21. You've been in my life most of my life. So you know I was over 21 when you came to me with it. Then the second one was that if in 1978, the law was if you were abused while in the family home, that you could not claim compensation. But I found out later that that law was brought in to stop husbands and wives pretending that the husband beat the wife so they could claim one parent benefit and the husband would still live in the house and go to work, basically. Okay. It was to stop that fraud. So my argument to social services back then was that wasn't my family. I didn't put myself into that family. You put me into that family. So then the next thing was there was no files to verify what I was saying. Crazy. So that's how it all started. Are
you dealing with both Southern Republic authorities and Northern Ireland authorities in terms of, because you were in the Navan Road, it's in Patrick's. What's it like, the contrast dealing with each one? I mean, Gillespie was good up the north. You know her, Eunan, don't you, as well? That lady Gillespie.
Yeah, Judith.
Judith, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Judith, the former assistant deputy chief constable that took over as the third chair of the interdepartmental working group here. And I mean, it's amazing what being in the know can do for you, because I mean, the legislation is corrected. For so long, birth mothers could not and still cannot look for their children, but certain people can circumvent these things, make a few phone calls, and suddenly things can just appear like Houdini, just out of nowhere. It's amazing. But yeah, it's Marie's a brilliant example of the trafficking, the system, the network, you know what I mean, that's going on between North and South, something that as Sally, myself, Frank and Breda are trying to pursue all of the issues that we're going after on a north-south basis and further afield for that matter as well. It just shows you, you know, you're highlighting here things like what were actually termed as certain types of institutions, like St. Louis, for example, was an industrial school. And all of these things were set up to take in kids of a certain age. They were sometimes used as one thing and named as, registered as one thing and being completely used as something completely different. You've seen how Marie was used as a child, sent to, and this highlights as well, you know, sometimes there's a mythology that the only women and girls in mother and baby institutions were actually single, pregnant, unmarried mothers, and that's not the case. I mean, there would have been women, for example, that were unmanageable as deemed by their parents, for example. Obviously, a lot of girls and women were referred and sent to these institutions by the courts, escorted by the police, etc., etc. There was a lot of women with psychological problems and girls, a lot of girls and women that had physical disabilities, for example, mental disabilities were in these institutions. So they were used as a whole mixture, you know, to basically incarcerate a lot of women and girls in a whole variety of circumstances. And it's absolutely shocking when you think that Marie was ferried back and forward across the border. You know what I mean? Between
obviously drugged as well.
Yes. I mean, these are the things that we need to investigate. And, you know, Marie is another case where fostering or boarding out, I mean, the exit pathways of all of these women and their children have to be investigated. They've been included in the Northern Ireland Truth Recovery Report. They've been included in the Northern Ireland research that was deliberated. The exit pathways are absolutely massive. And in terms of fostering and boarding out, they have to be considered. We have included those in the Sally reports. And the exit, I mean, if you look at the exit pathways, for example, one so-called mother and baby institution in the North Hopedean Hostel, 28% of the babies actually went into fostering care, not adoption. And that seemed to be the more likely destination for kids from the Protestant institutions for some reason. Right. But nevertheless, they have to be included. And, you know, again, I mean, the psychiatric mental institutions will never be investigated unless they're singled out. For example, you've got Muckamore Psychiatric Mental Asylum that's been investigated in a public inquiry in the north here. But again, there were so many girls and women that ended up in the psychiatric mental institutions as well, that with their babies. And of course, it was always used as a threat of blackmail for women and girls to give up their babies. That if they didn't do so, they would be sent to a psychiatric institution. So Marie's a brilliant example of why exactly there needs to be extensive north-south collaboration to investigate a whole raft of issues.
And Eunan, they were deliberately bringing them across the border. Is that your contention, that they were using the fluid legal situation, I guess, between both jurisdictions? Is that what they were doing, do you think?
There's no doubt about that, John, whatsoever. And we know that it happened with the industrial schools, with the mother and baby institutions, the Magdalen laundries. It's off the chart in terms of the trafficking between these two jurisdictions. And I mean, even one of the very few positive things that came from the Commission's report, the South of Ireland actually said that the only way to get to the bottom of some of these issues, fully investigate them with, you know, the desired outcome, is to have a north-south cooperation and investigation, the sharing of information, the sharing of files, etc., to get to the bottom of this. But of course, and trafficking is a major elephant in the room.
Yeah, and probably immunity, because I mean, people are, you know, they're just not going to come forward, are they, and explain what happened. I mean, what, you know, the story needs to be told more importantly than seeking justice, you know, seeking the nuns and priests and whatever. Although tempting though that is, it would be great if we could just find out what exactly happened.
Yeah, well, Marie's like so many, torn between two states. She's a product of the system, being fried between two jurisdictions that had give absolutely no cognizance to an international border. And again, it highlights, as I say, there needs to be extensive cooperation and collaboration done on this here on a state level. It's the only way to get to the bottom of this. We know that the Department of Foreign Affairs, for example, in the South, were signing off visas and passports for children from the North. And as I say, the only way to get to the bottom of this here is for the two states to now get their head in the game. But I mean, we've been shouting for this for a long time now, and nobody's making any moves whatsoever.
Frank, do you want to add anything before we go?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking that as Eunan has quite correctly said, you know, within the Sally reports, we've made it very clear that there is half a story being told here. It's the old story. He who controls the narrative controls the discussion. And through all of this, you know, for understandable reasons, the survivor community, people are concentrating on locations and, you know, what happened to them. But there is a much, much bigger story, which is why in the Sally reports we've made it very clear, like in the Birth Information and Tracing Bill and in the Burials Bill, particularly the Burials Bill, where we have inserted clauses that should be imported into that particular bill, yeah, in order to bring it around to the not only the kind of bill we think it should be, but also to you know, to solidify this so-called North-South divide. And here, you know, we've heard this evening a very fluid contribution there from Marie, demonstrating very, very clearly the fluidity of traffic, you know, between North and South. And you used a phrase there, John, about the fluidity of legal systems. I don't think it is necessarily the fluidity of legal systems. It is the fluidity of acceptance of the practices of religious orders. And if you like, the lack of independence within those who are practicing as civil servants, perhaps, or indeed as politicians, to actually stand up and be an independent voice on behalf of the very people they're supposed to represent. So those that is the kind of backdrop that we're up against. And it was interesting. There was a discussion going on there about accessing records and about getting some kind of historical information. And I've got a bit of a thing going on at the moment with one religious order, and also with Tesla. And the one thing I've discovered in all of this is the importance of indices of documentation. And the one body has produced a list of documentation they say they hold, which contains 45 sets of records. But as I found in the detail of the Mother and Baby Home report, there is actually 73 sets of records, which was handed to the Commission investigation by that very body as well. So that is the first thing. And of course, when you look at the list of records that are held, you realize that actually there's very few of those records actually being searched. For economic reasons or whatever the reason, being decided we're going to concentrate on providing the base set of details. But in one conversation I've had, particularly with the religious order, they're claiming, you know what, we don't have anybody alive. We don't have anybody who can tell us what happened, what was the practices, what was going on, etc., etc. But I found buried in the Commission of Investigation report a very clear commentary, very clear set of information, which demonstrates that the religious order in question provided historical accounts and statements from their very own sisters themselves to the Commission of Investigation. So when you've got people like Eunan and Marie and myself, you know, sort of knocking on these various doors, then they're being, and I'm being polite here, but they're being economic with the truth, or the truth about the information that they hold.
Yeah, they keep impeccable records, these orders, really.
Of course they do. But I've been saying now for a couple of years, about 3 years, before I met Brehany and Eunan and your good self, that really what should happen in the Republic is the installation of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And it was interesting, the rapporteur recently made that comment in his report, that there is no confidence in the Commission investigation system. There needs to be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, some people say, well, you know, if you have that, then the problem with that is that people can't be prosecuted. That's not the case, because there's plenty of Truth and Reconciliation Commissions around the world that have, the politicians have actually insisted that if anybody is found to broken the law, they get prosecuted, you know, with criminal charges of the like. So, well, you know, it's the canvas, unfortunately, which I and Eunan and Breda and obviously Marie has to navigate, and it's not for the faint-hearted, I can tell you.
No, Marie, I just want to say it's been absolutely fantastic to get to meet you yesterday and today and to hear your story, and I hope we've done it justice. I mean, there's somewhat many other aspects to it, but thank you very much.
Well, John, just let me tell you this before you finish, right?
Please.
So I had to go and meet with the Garda, right? Because they set up a special task force, right? They see, was there any I can't fucking say that word.
Criminality.
Yeah, right. That happened. So I was in the Cabra police station, and she says to me, Marie, you keep using the word trafficking. What do you mean by trafficking? And I said, well, they trafficked me from the north to the south, and then they trafficked my son from the south to the north. And she says, but there was no law against that in them days. I said, but there was a law against you bringing butter across, petrol across, but the nuns could take babies up and down and nothing says to them. How is that not trafficking?
It's a bit like the expression, you know, about the women who came over to England and were repatriated back to the Republic when the local church or the local Catholics found out who they'd got in their midst. It wasn't repatriation, it was rendition.
Yeah.
You know, it's that. And, you know, as Marie has very, very well demonstrated there, it was trafficking. Let's call it by its real name.
You'd go to prison if it was diesel. You know?
Sorry?
Yeah.
You'd go to prison if it was diesel.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get done if it was diesel or butter or alcohol being across the borders, but get a nun in a car and get any baby up and down through it.
Marie, we've run out of time, so I just want to say thanks again. Okay, thank you, and hopefully we'll speak to you soon. And Frank, Brehany, and Eunan, Duffy, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thanks, Terry. Thank you.
Bye.